Hello everybody, it's James here, Storytime with Dutch Mantell, and I'm actually going to do some professional plugs now. So you can find us on the WSI Wrestling Shoot Interviews YouTube, you can find us on the audio podcast wherever you download your audio podcasts, and let's have some books as well. Bang, The World According to Dutch.
Great book. Oh, better book.
Tales from a Dirt Road, also by Dutch Mantell, and from me, The Rock. You don't have to say better book, I know you don't get any residuals from them.
Great book.
Thank you. And Owen Hart, King of Pranks as well. You can get them all from Amazon. And if you want a signed copy, how do you get a signed copy, Dutch?
Just email me at my email address, of course, Dirty Dutch Mantell with 2 L's at gmail.com. Tell me what you want. I'll give you the price and we're off and running.
There you go. And the last thing I'll mention is if you're on iTunes, give us 5 stars. In fact, quite a lot of people have given us 5 stars already. I was quite surprised. I've never prompted anyone to give us a review on anywhere. So
wrestling fans gave you 5 stars.
They do.
Or gave us 5 stars?
Out of 5, yeah. No breaking the 5-star
that's unbelievable.
Dave Meltzer kind of thing.
Wrestling fans sometimes are they're the hardest to please, but to me, without wrestling fans, I would have been forced to go get a job and actually work for a living. I don't mind working for a living, but like I told you earlier, after you get to the job, they actually want you to do something. That's what bothered me. I didn't mind going to the job. It's the working part I didn't like. But anyway.
Yeah.
But thank you, wrestling fans, for saving me that embarrassment.
If you do, more than 3 hours a day, then it really is a day's work. It's terrible.
That's too much.
Far too much.
I can't do it.
We are going to talk about news on this episode. For those who don't know, we're doing sort of 1 week of news and then 1 week of questions, and then we're going to mix the format up as we go along down the line. But as we were recording, not on a Tuesday as we normally do, we actually recorded on a Sunday because I had to go away on holiday and enjoy myself for a few days. As we were recording, the death of Tim White was announced. I don't know how much time you spent with Tim White, but memories of the former referee.
Great guy. I met him in the mid-'90s when I did my first run in WWE. And Tim, not just with me, but with everybody, was very, very professional, very polite. If you had a question, you could ask Tim. And Tim, if he didn't have the answer, he'd get you an answer or direct you in a direction to where you could get an answer. And I didn't really know that much about Tim, but he was from up north somewhere. And of course, I'm from down south. But he one of the best referees they had. And I liked him a lot. And I was very sad to hear about his death. I didn't know he was sick. What happened to him? I don't even know that. I knew he passed away.
I'm not even sure it was announced, but I'll find out. But I'll ask you this: apart from a referee, was Tim White on the ring crew? Did he have any other duties that we may not know about back in WWF days?
I don't think he was on the ring crew, but he may have started on the ring crew and worked his way into a refereeing job, probably with the aid and the help of Pat Patterson. And he was a good referee, a great referee. And of course, he started, I think, with the driving Andre around. And I think he just drove him around when he was, and Tim was with them a long time. I think he drove Andre around, especially when he would make the loops. See, back in the day, Andre would go to different territories. And when he was in the New York territory, as we called it, New York, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Boston, Washington, D.C., that was what the guys in the business, they wouldn't call it like WWF. They'd call it the New York territory. And every time Andre came in, I think Tim White would be his designated driver. And Tim was great for him. Tim liked to drink. And, Andre, he could speak English, but not that good, but good enough. And he liked him. And after a while, he would actually request him to accompany him on the trips because Tim knew his perks. He knew his likes, his dislikes, what he liked to eat, what he liked to drink. And see, Tim would take care of all that for him. See, when they would stop, Andre couldn't go into a little store because, you know, he'd be like a freak show. He could get in, but he couldn't get out. So Tim would do all that for him. So very saddened by Tim's death. And really, I liked him a lot. Good guy. Very good guy.
Can I just ask, was Tim Andre's driver while he was traveling around the territories, or was Tim, as far as you know, only his driver when Andre became exclusive to the WWF?
Only there, only up north, when he was exclusive. Mm-hmm. He didn't follow him around the country. But before he was exclusive to WWF, you know, he was driving him then, I think. So, but when he would go to Florida or when he'd go to Texas or wherever he would go, or to Memphis, because, you know, guys like that, they tried to book out like twice a year, say 2 weeks in Florida, one in the spring and one in the late summer. And then Memphis, I think he came in once or maybe twice. But most of the time, I think Andre, he spent a lot of time in Japan, and he spent a lot of time in, I think, and the other territories, it would just spread out. And he was either in the New York territory or Japan. And I think that was about it.
We'll move on. Not quite as sad as news as a death, but Jim Duggan is going through yet another bout of cancer. I think it's prostate cancer this time. He's already had his prostate taken out, but he still needs the chemotherapy because the cancer has spread. And he's got another, probably as we record this, about 5 weeks of chemotherapy. Just best wishes to Jim Duggan, and any stories of Duggan?
Well, I remember Duggan. I first met him when I went to Mid-South. We call it the Bill Watts territory or the Louisiana territory. And that territory was huge. It took in all of Louisiana, most of Mississippi, up to half of Mississippi, Oklahoma, northern Texas, and somewhere else, but another adjoining state. But it was huge because the miles there were ungodly. We drove more miles there than truck drivers did. And they were long trips. Some trips were 400 miles one way. So if you went up, you know, you usually try to catch a town the next night close. But if you didn't, you just go up and you have to come back. And you could get a hotel or not. But, you know, doing 800 miles in one day plus throwing a wrestling match in there at the same time, I'm sitting here talking about a job. That was a job, buddy. And, but I remember one time, I think he was, hang on one second. I had this story and then I forgot it.
Shall I pause?
Pause a second. And Jim was always kidding around, yo, and stomping his foot. And actually what you saw outside the ring with Duggan was basically Duggan in the dressing room. Hey, yo, yo. And I remember one time, you remember the Berserker in WWE?
John Nord, yeah.
John Nord and Butch Reed didn't like each other. And they were snippy and talked behind the backs, and Jim heard about it. So he took it to Bill Watts, who is actually famous for settling out of the ring disputes. And now he would settle it. And I think they were in Tulsa on a Sunday. And I think Bill and John Nord and Butch Reed, he got them together. And he said, all right, guys, because he'd heard all this stuff behind the scenes. He said, you guys, we're going to settle this and we're going to do it the right way to do it. He took them in a room and he said, all right, go at it. And he said, go at what? He said, go ahead and fight. They said, what? He said, yeah. So he got them to fight. And I heard it from Duggan. He said they were some shots that come in. Berserker was big, Butch was big. And he said nobody won the fight, but the feud was over. They got it out of the system. And he said, man, they threw some haymakers that connected, but nobody ever went down. And actually, Duggan said he was proud of both guys. And they shook hands and left, and no more trouble. And that's the way you settled it.
Where was this fight? Was it in the ring? Was it in Bill's office?
No. It was in Tulsa in the back. During the show. It was about, I don't know, I think we wrestled Tulsa in the afternoon. Then that night we would go to Oklahoma City, and that was the night. That was the double header. So he caught him in Tulsa, and I don't know why he didn't catch it, because Tulsa was close to where he lived. I don't even think he went to Oklahoma City, but he went to the Tulsa show, and he called him in the back, and they went back there, and Duggan went with him, because Duggan was the one stirring it up anyway with Bill. He said, hey, you need to talk to these guys and blah, blah, blah. And so they went and took care of it. I wish I'd have seen it. And actually, I was riding with John that day, and he was talking about it going home. I said, what happened? He said, man, he hit me a couple of good shots. He said, he almost knocked me out. I said, no. He said, oh, yeah. He said, he got a good punch. I said, you ever get a good one? He said, yeah, I got several. But he didn't go down. And he said, well, he's a tough son of a gun. And there was no more trouble. He never even said another word about Butch Reed. And from what I'm hearing, Butch Reed never said anything about John Nord again. I mean, they didn't become big buddies or anything, but, at least it stopped that.
I've asked a couple of people this and have sort of like run the gamut of opinions, but when two wrestlers especially, have got an issue with each other, do you advocate for ignoring each other, talking it out, or fighting? What's the sort of best way of dealing with the animosity?
Well, it's according to who you're dealing with, too. If you can talk to some guys who have a reasonable frame of mind, you can get them to talk it out, or one of them to talk it out, or the hothead. But if you get two guys that are hotheads, and in wrestling, you get a lot of those that think they can whip the world, but, they really can't. And I think they should just go ahead and fight it out. I've suggested that to a couple of guys. You know who I suggested it to one time? Jimmy Cornette and Vince Russo. Because Jimmy, he goes on and on how much he hates Vince Russo. And in Vince's defense, he never really badmouthed Cornette, but he said he wished he'd leave him alone. So I told Jimmy, I said, Jimmy, listen, because every time you'd see Jimmy could get himself worked up. And, he'd start doing this with his shirt, and he's that SOB and that MFer. And I said, Jimmy, why don't you call him up? I said, I'll do it for you. Why don't you say, and wherever you are and wherever he is, we'll find a cow field. Tell him to meet you at mile marker, whatever. And we'll walk up, and we could do it off the interstate. That'd be a good way to find at the mile marker. We'll walk up, step over that fence, and you guys just throw down. And whoever wins, and then let's let it go. Because I don't know what you expect to get out of this other than bad mouthing each other. But I really think that Jimmy liked bad mouthing him. Because when you hear Jimmy go on a rant, it's hilarious. He's a good talker anyway. He uses big words, and by the time you're listening to him, it's funny. It really is. But he doesn't want anybody to laugh at him, so you can't let him see you like chuckling. But he is so good when he pitches a bitch, I call it. He is so good that it's entertaining as hell. And that's why a lot of people get around Jimmy and just bring up Vince Russo's name, and that gets him going. And with Vince, I don't think he's that volatile. So, but he doesn't like Jimmy, and Jimmy doesn't like him.
I always call it in a different sort of situation. I've got certain friends who can go out for a nice drink and then pace themselves throughout the evening. But some people, I always call it, they hear the starting gun, bang, and then all of a sudden it's the 100-yard dash to drink as much as possible. And it sounds the sort of same with Jim. You just say something to rile him, and bang, the 100-yard dash gun goes off, and he's out the blocks.
Oh, Jimmy is notorious for that. I may have told this story, but I was working Smoky Mountain, and he had gotten mad at this guy who pulls the cables. Did I tell you this?
Yes, you did tell us this, yes.
And I don't know what it is about this guy, but he pissed Jimmy off. And Jimmy one day was agitated anyway. I think somebody brought up Vince Russo's name. So he was agitated. And I forgot, I think the guy walked in front of camera range. And now it's going to be an edit. And so Jimmy grabbed him in the back, threw him up against the locker. I've told the story. And I had to pull him off of him. I said, Jimmy, stop. I mean, nothing's worth that. He's just, I don't know what the guy's problem was anyway. He knew not to do it, but these guys are not PhDs if you just got to pull a TV cord.
Speaking of people who know not to do things, naughty, it's sort of John Laurinaitis related, but Bruce Pritchard has replaced. Bruce Pritchard is already senior vice president, executive director of SmackDown and Raw, and at least until recently NXT 2.0, and now he is the general manager of talent relations. I don't know if it's like a figurehead role, like Stephanie taking over from Vince with the CEO thing, but really Vince is still there. Mm-hmm. But is he just keeping the seat warm until John can return to work? And basically, what do you think of Bruce as talent VP executive when you were working there? I know he wasn't there in the 2010s, was he, when you were there?
In WWE?
In WWE, yeah.
Bruce, no, he was in TNA. But let me back you up on the thing you said. Keeping the seat warm until John returns. John may not return. John is not Vince. They could get rid of John Laurinaitis and not blink an eye. Because if he has, and from what I understand, they are reviewing past NDAs. And if he has another one in there, well, that's going to label Mr. Laurinaitis as a problem child. And that's the last thing they want is problems like that. So I think Mr. Laurinaitis' odds of returning to WWE, Raw, or SmackDown, or the Golden Towers up there in Stamford may not happen. Because, they may have to let him go. Now, he's not Vince, like I said. Vince owns 80% of the voting shares, from what I understand. So he can't be voted out. He's not going to vote against himself. Vince may be back, but I don't think Laurinaitis will. So what was the second part of that question?
Well, I'll ask it as well. But just before, 2 weeks ago on the podcast, I said that Vince has the A-grade shares. It turns out that the B-grade shares is what Vince has.
B-grade.
And they're the ones with the voting power, apparently. But I asked about Bruce as... I don't know, just in WWE, you weren't there at the same time, but in maybe the mid-90s, what were Bruce's roles?
He was in the office somehow, and he got into the office in WWE, I think because he had worked with a promoter in Houston called Paul Bosch, who just promoted Houston and maybe some shows within 50 miles of Houston. And he would just bring in different talent from different places. Mostly he would use the Mid-South talent because they had had TV, in the town of Houston. But he would bring in Brody, he would bring in Flair, he would bring in Briscoe, he would bring in Dusty, Dick Murdoch, Wahoo McDaniel, Johnny Valentine. He would bring in the top stars of the wrestling world, and he would use them every so often in that Houston Coliseum there, in a big Coliseum. And he drew well, and he paid well. See, everybody that wanted to have a good week in Louisiana could be down, but you work Houston, That was your week. So you could go into Houston and make, back in the days in the 80s, you could make $500, $600, $700 in a night. That was a good payoff in those days. So hell, it ain't bad today. But Mr. Bosch, and what was the question you asked me?
Well, do you know what? Why don't we go with Bosch instead? Because you've worked Houston a few times here and there, haven't you? So was Bosch, in your opinion, the best payoff man in the business?
At the time, yes, by far. Because I don't know why he paid so. He didn't have to. But see, a lot of promoters should have been paying like that, but they didn't. And this was the formula they would use. Let's say you had, let's make it easy, 10 wrestlers on a card and a referee. Okay. So you drew $10,000. Okay. And it was a rule of thirds. 30% of that money was to pay for expenses, not talent, but expenses, office expenses and taxes. And other 30% was supposed to go to talent. And then the other 30%, the promotion, that was their money. So if you took the $3,000 that the talent should have made, you divide 10 in that. So it's each wrestler should have made $300. But of course, they didn't come to see the first match. They came to see the last match. So the main event would probably get $500 each. First match would probably get $200 each. And that's the way they did it. But this is what they would do. And this is what the wrestlers used to say. The promoters get first count. We didn't know what the house was. We just had to go on what the promoters told us. Except last week was $8,000 and the house looked up. Well, it could have been up or not according to what the promoter needed. You can say, oh, no, it just looks that way. It's actually down some. Down, but it's not. But see, they get first count and they take that money and just tell you what they want to tell you, and you have no recourse. That was why people have been talking about a union for all these years, because they would draw money, get first count, tell you something else, and pay you off on the lower figure that they would release. And a lot of times they didn't release nothing. They just, you just saw it on your check, whatever you made. It's a little bit of a shady business at times.
Did you ever hear the old story of how the promoters worked out how to pay the talent? Was they put all the money into a big basket, threw it up in the air, and whatever stuck to the ceiling, the wrestlers kept?
Oh, I believe that. I do believe that. Now, there's a lot of wrestlers that got slapped around because of the payoffs. Brody was one of them. I don't know who he slapped around, but he snatched a few and they come up with some more money. And if a guy bitched about what he made and the promoter said, I'll make it up to you. Oh yeah, he may make it up the next week. He will give you some more money, but he's not losing any money because he just taking that money from the underneath guy, the early matches. He just take that money from there. So he couldn't lose.
I asked before, probably Paul Bosch was the best payoff man in the business. Who was the worst that you're not friends with currently?
The worst payoff man in the business?
Yeah.
Oh, this is a long time ago. Nick Goulas. By far the worst. And now I got along with him because I wouldn't come in unless I had a set guarantee. So he paid me. But a lot of those guys, he paid them. I don't know how they made it. He paid them as low as he could pay them so they could still eat and maybe get a little place to stay. And that was it. He was known as the worst payoff man in the business unless you had a deal. Now, if you had a deal, he'd pay you. But some of those other guys, I felt sorry for him. But if he's not making enough money, he needs to either get him another income or go get another wrestling job somewhere. I can't tell him what to do. But Nick Goulas had this idiot kid. You ever heard about him?
He may have been called George.
He was called George Goulas, and he was arrested 3 times in one day for solicitation. And, solicitation is looking for prostitutes. And they got a road here. I forgot the name of it. It's called something road. And he was caught at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock in the morning. Then he was caught at 12. And then he was caught like 4 o'clock. 3 times in the same day for solicitation. And he's about a dumb bastard. So.
Did you ever wrestle him?
One time. And I says, because if you go in there, and I knew this, if you go in there and you could possibly have him do a few moves that he looks good in, well, then he would request you. So if I went in there and made him look decent, well, he'd go back to daddy and say, oh, I want to work with Dutch. I want to work with Dutch. Well, I didn't want to work with him because he's the worst, and he's the worst wrestler I've ever seen too. He's about 6'4", 6'5". He's not a little guy, but he's just clumsy. Anyway, I went out with him and it was the worst possible match. I hit him hard. I didn't do nothing, took him down, twisted his knee. So when he went back, he just thought I was a horrible worker. And he didn't suggest me. So I released myself from that damn weight around my neck right off the bat. And then I went working with Randy Savage and we drew some money.
Daddy said sell. Is that an apocryphal tale or was that real?
That's I've heard him say that. In the ring, Daddy says sell.
He was saying to you?
No, not to me, because I was only with him one time. I may have been with him twice, I think. That's about it. So, but you guys used to come back and if you've heard the story, everybody's heard the story. Daddy said sell. He was just horrible. And he was, I don't know. Let's don't ruin my day talking about George.
No, we shall move on then. I'm going to skip a couple of things here. I might come back to that one, though. Vince McMahon's past has come to haunt him. And Rita Marie Chatterton, WWF's first referee, accusations that Vince forced himself upon her in the back of a limo, got her in the limo under the guise of discussing a pay rise and merchandise and stuff like that. But Mario Mancini, real name Leonard Inzatari, has backed up Rita's claims that this did happen, and he said that, or in fact I think Rita has said this, the only 2 people she told at the time were Mario and Andre the Giant, who obviously cannot corroborate it. But do you remember hearing about this story back in 1986, and what do you make of the story once again coming back to haunt Vince? Okay,
when the story came out, was that on the, what show was that brought it out?
Geraldo Rivera. That was 1992. She made the accusations public, which by that point, I believe the statute of limitations had run out.
Well, I heard about it with the Geraldo disclosure. I didn't hear about it before. And one reason for that is the communications back in the 80s weren't like today. We didn't have the internet. You just couldn't pop open your phone and read everything that was going on. And a lot of the news that came from where I was, either in Tennessee or in Georgia and Florida, we didn't get a lot of WWF news. We didn't get news from, the other territories that much. But when I did hear about it, I immediately kind of believed it. And the reason I believed it was this woman, I don't know if she was paid off or not, but they just didn't do that in those days. Those women did not come forward with stories like that, because if they did, the other promoters would never book them. And a lot of places want to call that being blackballed. And it is in a way, but it's not being blackballed because of what she did to Vince. It's being blackballed for what she might do to the promoter she's working for later on. whether it's true or not. Most of the promoters didn't know it was true. I think most of the promoters thought it was true, and it could have been because Vince, back in those days, he'd only been promoting because he bought his father's territory, I think, in the mid 70s, 76.
Vince probably bought off Vince Senior. I think officially around 82, 83. So it was a bit later.
Well, maybe. And that's when he started expanding. That's when he did start expanding.
Yeah.
But the promoters wouldn't bring in somebody like Rita Chatterton because, first of all, the premise, a woman referee, was unheard of. I mean, you see it now, but back in those days, a woman referee is like a football referee. They were mostly males. If you see a woman, you go, what the hell is this? What does she know about it? But, and then when and you talk about Mario Mancini, I was just with him about 2 or 3 months ago at a signing up in New Jersey. And he wasn't really talking about that, but he has spent a lot of time, most of his time up in that area. And he knows a lot of stories. And he told me, we were sitting around after the signing, we was waiting for the show to start that night. We were sitting around and eating. And he was saying, that's one of the more lamer things that he's heard. He said, some of those stories out there will curl the hair on the back of your neck. And he said, I'm not going to say them because knowing the litigious nature of WWE and Vince, he said, I don't want anything coming from me that may agitate him because the next thing I know, I'll have a lawsuit in my hand.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we should get him on this show. And then we said that a couple of last sentences and I thought, no, we shouldn't.
Yeah,
yeah.
Well, I think he's got enough sense to not say what he doesn't know. But what is the rule on that? You can say hearsay says. Can you say that?
I would not like to stick my neck out and suggest what you can and cannot say, even if you added the word allegedly on it. So I'll tell you what. From there, I am gonna. My legal advisor has told me to move on. So
okay.
So we'll move on, and we're actually going to move on to Matt Riddle, and he has been a boon to SmackDown ratings recently. You watch SmackDown, you review it for Sportskeeda. I always give Sportskeeda a shout out, and Matt Riddle is a single star. And if you were the person to give Matt advice to make it to the top of the WWE tree, what would you say to him?
Well, they made a great move with him by getting him over by putting him with Orton. Because that's one of the deals there. You can get over by osmosis. You like that word? I do. But that's just meaning just surrounding a star. So he surrounded Orton, who I predicted would be probably the next challenger for Roman Reigns. And he would have been, my prediction would have held true had not Randy got hurt. Because I think the people would have accepted that Randy has a legitimate chance of beating Roman Reigns without the bloodline helping him. I think people would have bought into that and they would have drew money. What I think with Riddle is they beat him, I think, 2 weeks ago. And the advanced, I forgot what it is now. It just all runs together. But Riddle's he's going to be a big star. He's different. The kids like him. The girls like him, and he actually has enough wrestling ability and moves that the guys will like him. So I see nothing but good things for Matt Riddle. So how well did he help the SmackDown ratings?
Well, I believe it started when he challenged Roman Reigns for the title, and then he couldn't challenge Roman again if he'd lost. But also the ratings were boosted by Vince McMahon appearing on the show for the first time after all these accusations. But the audience stuck with it, and Matt Riddle seems to do very well.
Well, the boost primarily was Vince. Mm-hmm. And after he went out there, everybody in America, they did this collective like, what the? Because he was out there, 45 seconds, and then he left, and that was it. I think that was Vince's collective, like, giving the bird finger to everybody out there. And like he was saying, I'm not going anywhere. And he may not. He may have to step down, which he's done. But Vince, never underestimate Vince. And that's when I said a little bit earlier about Laurinaitis. Laurinaitis is going to be they're going to throw him to the wolves, because now they can actually throw a human being out there instead of Vince. And John, I hate to tell you, buddy, but that's going to be you. And I think in his head, he kind of knows the position he's in.
Well, just to re-ask then, so do you think Matt Riddle should stay the course, do what he's doing, or is there anything you think he could improve on, or you would like to see him do to take him to that next level in the eyes of the fans?
Well, he's in a position now to where he could, I think, really make some waves. Now, SmackDown, to me, because I watch SmackDown, I don't watch Raw. And why don't I watch Raw?
Too long?
It's 3 hours. 3 hours is a friggin' commitment. And I'm not. And it ends too late, too. It ends 11 o'clock, I guess. That's too late. Even for me, who I don't do nothing anyway, but that is even late to me. The perfect wrestling time for a show really is 1 hour. That's the perfect time, because AEW does 1 hour, and the show is actually good. See, Rampage is on Friday nights, and I do that show too. I would rather watch Rampage because it's mostly wrestling and some really good wrestling. And even though it's against unknowns, these guys perform, and they go out there and they bust their butts. And sometimes I would rather see an unknown than see the same stars over and over and over again. You know what? That SmackDown uses that formula. Mm-hmm. You'll see the same guys week in, week out, no matter what. I'm going to bring up something to you. Hulk Hogan, when he was a big star, how many times did you see him wrestle on TV?
Well, you've asked me this once before. I had the answer for you. So, apart from the NBC primetime specials,
yep,
and very occasionally on primetime on cable or something like that, I think on TV, in about 9 years, when he was the champion and everything, probably about 3 times.
Yeah, because they made the people, if you wanted to see Hulk Hogan, you had to go buy a ticket. Now, you might see him do an interview. That's different. But to see him wrestle, no, because they made him an attraction. But if you see him the same guy, and I bitch about this every week on SmackDown, it's the same guys over and over and over again. And when you see them come out, you go, God. You know, when you see the Usos come out there, great talent. I like those kids. But you've seen them every week for the last year. Please. I don't want to see my same grass cutter every time, every week. I want to see a different guy out there. You know, at least break it up some. And I'm on SmackDown right now. But when Brock Lesnar, when he showed up to challenge Roman Reigns, everybody went, oh, God, again? Well, they were stuck. I'm going to defend WWE. They were stuck for an opponent for Roman Reigns. But had Randy Orton not got hurt, that was his spot. So what do you think the collective reaction would have been to fans? Instead of seeing Brock Lesnar walk out there, they saw Randy Orton come out there. They'd have fell out of the seats. because that's something they haven't seen. Let's see what Orton can do. And Orton is over. He don't have to do nothing. He's just over. And some guys, I don't think he's the greatest wrestler, but he has that aura about him that he's a tough son of a gun, and he is. So I think they would have bought that more than they bought Brock Lesnar. You can only run the same guy so many times before you said, I've already seen it. It's like running the same movie over and over. I've seen it, guys. And you change the finish. I don't care, but I've seen the movie.
We will talk about.
Was that a useless rant? I just went on and off. Okay.
How could you ever have a useless rant? You always
well, I can. Put me and Cornette together. We'll just rant about the weather. It don't matter.
Your rant's about the English weather. Jesus, man, I'm getting seasonal affective disorder in summer. It's so depressing. I will move on to our next thing to talk about. And you were mentioned before we went on air that you were a fan of Austin Theory. Now, this sort of went from Matt Riddle, he failed to win Money in the Bank this past weekend. Austin Theory wins it, takes a photo, he does the whole selfie thing. Yeah. And a couple of different strands I'll ask from this, but Austin Theory, as a talent, you are a fan.
I am a fan of Austin Theory because when I was in TNA, I was going to book him. And that was me and Bruce. Not Bruce, he wasn't there. It was me and
Scott D'Amore.
Scott, he was there. Jeff Jarrett, but he sent his stuff in, and like Moxley, he sent his stuff in there too. But that was back in about 2008, and I was going to book Moxley, and then he ended up going to WWE. I was going to book Theory because if you look at him, there's something about that kid that just says, I think I can be a star. So when he went, didn't he go to WWE? He went to the developmental first, right?
Yeah, Theory? I'm looking. So NXT in 2019. So I think he started wrestling in 2016. So this would have been in the Global Force era when you were working for Impact, wasn't
it? 2017.
Yeah, so that'll be around that era.
But he ends up going to WWE, and then I hear that Vince likes him. And how often do you hear that? Not very much. And then he did an angle with him, and he's like his sponsor or whatever they're doing. But and I said right then, I said, that's in 2 years he'll be the big star. He will go the route of John Cena, and he will be pushed and pushed and pushed. And he won't be pushed like Roman Reigns, because Roman really doesn't have a character. He does now, but he didn't then. But this kid has a character. And I'm going to say he's going to be along the lines of a Kurt Angle. And because the kid's not overly big, but he is good, and he's got a mouth. And he's like a little whiny little brat that you want to slap. And that's what makes a good heel. Like if, he just whines and cries and moans and groans. And after a while you say, shut up. You want somebody to shut him up. And with that picture taking he does, that gets heat with me on people I don't even know. But he does that perfectly. He does it at the right time. And maybe he's coached in that, or maybe he's not. Maybe that's just a natural thing that he always did. But who is booking Austin Theory is booking him right. If this is not Austin Theory himself, which I think about 80% of it is, and then they're just doing the other 20% to finish him off, he's gonna be a big star. So, and if he could, and the thing about winning Money in the Bank, he can swoop in at any time, capture the win, and he's the champion. I love the idea. I really do. So let's see what they do with it.
I had something I wanted to bring up to you, and Matt Riddle loses again. He seems to be on a losing streak, which is
Yeah.
WWE's weird way of pushing somebody in the sense of he
I
beat
don't
them
get
and beat
it.
them and beat them and beat them and beat them and try and generate audience sympathy. It worked once with Daniel Bryan, and now they seem to think it works with everyone. But as a veteran booker, what is the sweet spot of, let's say, wrestler A is feuding with wrestler B? You can't have wrestler A, who's the good guy, beat B, the bad guy, straight away, or else there's no story. But how do you keep A strong and keep the fans with them, and then keep interest in them fighting B continually as well?
Because they invented DQs for a reason. They invented both guys fighting outside for a reason, or outside interference for a reason. I would not have pinned Riddle, and he got pinned because Roman Reigns doesn't need it. But what I would have done, I think, is I would take it almost 2 minutes from the end, and then have Riddle almost have it one, boom, boom, boom. He's knocked both Usos on their ass. It's just a matter of time that he beats Roman Reigns for the title. And all of a sudden, he almost does it, and in come the Usos again. And they start kicking his butt, and ding, 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 ding. You know, this is what I noticed too. When they stop a match, they just go ding. In the old days, they used to go ding, 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 which gave you the impression, stop. And then after I had him down, they getting ready to finish him. That's when I would have actually run in Brock Lesnar. I wouldn't have played the music and him walk in. I just had him run in and whoom, 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 and clean it up. Now, that's what I would have done, because make it exciting. It wasn't exciting the way they did it. He come out there and he'd already beat Riddle, so the people already in a bad frame of mind anyway, because they're not excited. And he comes out there in the hat on and offers the deal and the handshake. And to me, they could have juiced that up to it could have been a lot more exciting than what it was. And now people were disappointed because they just had a title match a month earlier, and they've already seen it. So I don't think they were excited about it at all.
No,
I wasn't.
I don't think so either. We will move on to UFC 276. I watched it. The bits I didn't fall asleep for. It was a terrible pay-per-view. It had a couple of good fights in between, but the main events were awful. But significant in wrestling terms because Vince McMahon, Stephanie McMahon, Triple H, Nick Khan, and in a neck brace to sell an attack by Happy Corbin, Pat McAfee, bless this man for going out on pay-per-view with a neck brace and selling an injury. When did kayfabe die for you? And why don't wrestlers make the effort like this anymore? It's great.
Well, we used to have to make the effort because it was a business. Because if you were hurt, either legitimately or not, you needed to give the appearance that you were hurt. Even if you were walking down the street and a fan saw you, if they see you walking, they said, wait a minute, I thought he was hurt. Well, you may not have lost a bunch of fans, but you lost that one. So he's not in the belief system anymore. I think that has probably been on its way out for the last 40 years. It started years ago. But Pat McAfee is the type of guy who respects this business. Even though he didn't make his place in the world in the wrestling business, made it in football as a kicker, but he respects the business. But not only that, he respects himself, because he's telling people he's got hurt, and he may know the truth, but they don't. I've always said this: the people will believe until you give them a reason to disbelieve. And if he was sitting there with no neck brace on, then he showed back up on SmackDown, he's got a brace on, and the people are going to say, wait a minute, he didn't have one on at that UFC or UFC fight. So, and I'm agreeing with you. I said, bless him for trying to carry out the story that he's hurt. So let me ask you this, since you said, and I saw that picture. I saw a picture of them. Why were they all there?
I
mean, the
know.
McMahons, wait a minute. Let's think about it. The McMahons are not going to show up for no reason with Nick Khan.
And it was in Las Vegas as well. It wasn't like it was in Madison Square Garden down the road.
But they showed up. Isn't UFC owned out of Vegas?
It's basically their home base, Vegas, yeah. But they do travel all around the place.
Well, I know that, but they were all there together because they were in town. But the idea that Vince is there with Nick Khan and Stephanie and Triple H and Pat, he was just there, I guess. I don't know. But I think there's a little more to that than what meets the eye. So who's buying who?
Well, I was going to suggest something else, is that they were all there for the main event and they were all sat first row you could sit behind the various staff around the octagon side, right behind Israel Adesanya. So when they're back to their corners and Israel's there, the camera's on him, and you can see all five of them in frame as well. So it's very strategically placed as well, they were.
Now, and I don't follow MMA, so UFC. Israel is who?
Israel Adesanya, he is one of their champions. I think middleweight. I'll double check it.
And they were right on like his corner side?
They were in the audience, but they were directly behind where he would sit in the corner. You couldn't miss him in the audience.
Well, it was a great shot, and a great shot to be in Vegas. So, but I think there's some meaning behind that too. I don't know. I can't say, but it makes for great speculation. Mm-hmm. See, WWE is a company that's worth about $5 billion. UFC is a company that's worth comparably the same, correct?
Yeah, around that, yeah.
And Nick Khan being there. See, I know they were in Vegas, but Nick Khan being there, I mean, he's the money guy, and he's there too. So that's what I'm reading into it.
UFC is valued at about $9 to $10 billion, and Israel is indeed about 9 to 10, so about double WWE at this point. Right, we shall. Excuse me, I'm having an asthma attack as I give you just going dead wheezy for whatever reason. Right, we'll do a few more things, and then I will thank you for your time, and then we will close this place down. But your former Real American associate Claudio Castagnoli, FKA, formerly known as Cesaro, he made his debut for AEW at AEW versus NJPW Forbidden Doors, the mystery replacement for Bryan Danielson. Thoughts on Cesaro as a talent? I know you're going to love him, and to be honest, all the fans loved him as well, and they were always sort of stumped as to why he wasn't more appreciated by WWE.
Well, join the club. I was a fan of Cesaro. I still am, not only as a wrestler, but as a person. Good guy who came from humble beginnings, and he speaks 5 languages and carries himself well. Probably the strongest guy. I think strongest guy in WWE. I mean, since Mark Henry didn't lift anymore, and a great, great athlete, and very smart, very intelligent, very well read. So, and I'm thinking, why can't they get something that'll stick on this guy? So I remember one day, it was Sunday morning, or maybe I'm sorry, it was a Wednesday morning. Vince called me. Seb. Yeah, Vince McMahon. Oh, hi, I'm Vince. He's never called me before. And I told Vince. Okay. So let me ask you a question. Okay. Listen, I want to put Cesaro with you and Swagger. What do you think? I said, well, and this is the first I'd heard about it. And I was on that immigrant thing, you know. I was anti-immigrant, letting everybody in, and I still am, really. So, but I said, and then, well, how can we make that work? I said, he is one of the good ones. He went through the system. He waited in line. He filled out the papers. He did this. He did that. He did it officially. So he is welcome in America as long as he passes and does what he has to do. I love it. I like it. I like it. We're going to go with it. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to put him with you and Swagger. Okay. Click. He's gone. So he puts him with me on the next show. He just sends him out. I guess the commentary team cover the story and we take off. And I think about, he wasn't with us long, maybe 3 months, maybe. I'd have to actually look that up. And then I show up at TV one day and they're taking him away from me, taking him away from me and Jack. And now this All-American, the real Americans were getting over. I could tell when I would walk into an arena, I mean, the room changed. We got a saying in wrestling, read the room. It's like, you know, you've heard that say, read the room. Well, in wrestling, when you go into an arena and you got to feel it. You got to feel what the room, how they're accepting you or what they think about you. And they like these two guys, even though I was the heat magnet for them. They like Swagger and they like Cesaro together because both guys about 6'5", strong. And then I show up at TV one day and they put him with Heyman. And I asked one of the agents, I says, why? And I never doubted anything, really. I was glad to be there, but I'm thinking, why would anybody make such a, you got to watch what you say too, make such a move? He's getting over. We're all getting over with this threesome here. Well, Vince, he wants to put him with Heyman. And then I said, why? He said, Vince thinks he can get him heat. He was getting over with us. He really was. And they put him with Heyman. And then 3 weeks later, they took him from Heyman because Heyman killed him too. I mean, if you want to talk about a guy that he went from a push and he dropped down to get another push and dropped down before he could get the push. So if you ask me what WWE was thinking, I have no idea. I mean, not everything they do works. If only one thing out of 10 works, well, at least that's one thing that works. I hadn't really seen them do anything lately that's really noteworthy. I mean, the Riddle thing was good, and I think the Theory thing is going to be good. But all the rest of it, bringing John Cena in for 1 week, that's good for 1 week's ratings, but what are you going to do next week? See, booking is not this week. Booking is a month down the line. You can't book. I say, well, I'm going to be back here next week. I'm going to do this, and that's next week. Okay. Well, what are you going to do a month from now? If you're back, you got TV every week. See, I was versed in that because we had Memphis house show every week, 52 weeks a year. So if you didn't entertain those people 1 week, they wouldn't come the next week. That's why everything was so wild and open there.
Going back on Cesaro briefly, is two things one thing you mentioned is he speaks 5 languages. It's the World Wrestling Entertainment. Surely that should be of very high value to them, but it didn't seem to be for whatever reason. And 2, he always struck me as somebody, Cesaro, as almost like Bryan Danielson, as in people just liked him for him. He didn't need like an outlandish personality, and if they just sort of let him be himself and just put, you know what I'm saying, he would have done really well.
That goes against the grain of WWE, though. They want to craft and mold every character, and they really couldn't do Bryan Danielson. He just wouldn't cooperate, I guess. He had to get over on his own through his work. And Cesaro was the same way. But I was thinking Cesaro would have been an easier case he can almost, and I suggested this one time, why don't you do the James Bond 007? And you told me, did you tell me they did it later on? It didn't work?
No, it wasn't me, no.
Okay, somebody told me they did it later on and it didn't work, but they could have done more with him than what they did. And then I don't know why he quit. He probably got just burned out. He was there about 10 years at least. So, and he made a lot of money. And when you quit after 10 years, there's a reason for that. And then he went to AEW, and that wasn't a surprise to me. But when they stopped, when Swagger and Cesaro stopped in the middle of the ring, and the people was going, we the people. See? And what's that tell you? It's been 4 or 5 years since these guys were together, and they still remember that team.
It's
been 8 years.
Well, it's 2013, 2014 around.
Well, it had to be 20. Yeah, it was 2014. And they still remember we the people. So that was a gimmick that they let get away from them. Big time.
You know, I watched Moonraker the other day. I mean, if Cesaro was channeling the Moonraker Roger Moore, no wonder that gimmick failed. That's a terrible film.
Moonraker? I didn't see it.
Awful. It's like the 5th one. It's the one where Roger Moore goes into space. James Bond. Terrible.
Well, I remember James Bond when he first started. I can't watch the latest ones, but
it goes in order.
They missed the boat on Cesaro big time.
Yeah. I'll mention. There's only a couple more things I'll bring up, and then we'll shut down this podcast. And one of them is. You wanted to talk, speaking of Cesaro again, in fact, you wanted to make mention of one of the oddest photos that's made it out of wrestling in quite a while, and it's Tony Khan hugging Cesaro. Like, I've heard various different ways of phrasing it, like a child hugging Mickey Mouse in Disneyland, or maybe it looks like one of them's dying in the photo, like they're crying, or Tony Khan looks like he's crying. But yes, this photo, what do you think of it?
Well, I think I went on Twitter with a tweet. I says, what is going on here? And I said, you won't catch Vince hugging somebody like that. And you won't. You'll see Vince in a hug with a guy, but it's like boom, boom. But Tony was in this embrace with Cesaro, and it caught me by surprise first. And then I got to thinking about it. I says, well, maybe this is what the wrestling business needs, because Tony Khan loves this business. He has loved this business for years. Now, about 2014, I was with WWE, and we were in Jacksonville, and that's where Tony lives. Have I told this story before? You have to be my. And he was back.
Yeah, carry on with it. I don't know.
He was backstage. And he came up to me and he introduced himself, and he says, I'm the part of the family that owns the Jacksonville Jaguars. And I knew that somebody named Khan owned it, but he was his son. And he started just talking just about wrestling and some stuff. And his knowledge was unbelievable. And he didn't say he wanted to get into the wrestling business, but he was backstage and walking around and talking to everybody. Of course, nobody knew who he was, or I certainly didn't. He introduced himself. But I said, wow. And I told somebody about him. I said, he's got like $1 billion. And somebody said, well, hell, introduce him to me. I put him in the wrestling business. But he loves the business. So I'm thinking, if this guy is not afraid to show his emotions like that, he may be really a good thing for wrestling. Now, I don't think he can be used or abused or treated as a money, just a money mark. I think he's got more sense than that. But he got AEW to where they are today, and they're on 2 different channels, and they're syndicated. And some of I think in their live events are doing well, and he may not be making a lot of money, but I do believe that he is actually an attribute to the business, because I don't know how he books. How many TV shows they got?
Well, you can add on Ring of Honor as well, because I think he books that as well. So they've got Dynamite, they've got Rampage, they've got YouTube shows, they've got Ring of Honor as well now, and he seems to book it all in pretty much himself with a bit of input.
Well, that's almost impossible.
Mm-hmm.
How can you book all those shows and not tramp back on yourself? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, your mind I can only book like one show, one theme at a time, because then if I'm thinking about this, another show, well, what am I going to do there? It'd be too much. But he must have a 3-track mind that he can keep it all separated. And I think what he's doing is almost a Herculean job of trying to book 3 or 4 different companies and different TV shows. I don't see how he does it. But if he does, you know what he used to do, right? He was a statistician or he did it for football teams. I think he did for basketball teams and baseball teams. He said, instead of getting a guy hitting 350, get a guy who hits like 210, but he gets on base more. And you don't got to pay him as much. And you fill the team up with that. Hopefully you have a winning season. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that works, but it is a good way to look at it anyway. But
he was, according to the always reliable Wikipedia, senior vice president with the Jacksonville Jaguars of football technology and analytics. I know that analytics, and he also is co-owner, of Fulham Football Club, which goes up and down the Premier League around my way as well. So he wears a lot of hats, certainly.
I don't know how he does it, but you think he has the same love for football. You guys call it football, right?
Yeah.
And we call it soccer.
Yeah. Unless it's on a TV show. So we've got Soccer AM and Soccer Sunday. So like if it's on a TV show, it will be referred to as soccer, but no one calls it soccer. It's very, I don't know if it's for international distribution reasons, basically.
Well, but he has the same love for soccer? You think?
Well, I don't think he spends anywhere near as much time booking.
No, I bet he doesn't
in the boardroom of Fulham FC.
When you hire a soccer player, he either does it or he doesn't. Mm-hmm. There's no byline or storyline you can give him because the other team is not playing by the same rules. Mm-hmm. But I actually like that he has bought into the wrestling business. I think he's an attribute. And John Cena's 20th anniversary or something.
Yeah, debut on WWE.
He had some AEW guys that they cleared to say a few words about John Cena. I think Jericho was one. I forgot who else they had.
Big Show, Daniel Bryan, or Bryan Danielson. I can't. He's been gone for ages now, and I still can't get used to calling him by his real name, Bryan Danielson.
Yeah, but I think he's a good thing for wrestling. I really do.
Speaking of Bryan, I will close on these couple of things. We're about up to time with the podcast, but I can't not mention, because obviously you watch Rampage for Sports Key to do review show, and Rampage's viewership the last few weeks has tanked really badly. Are they doing something wrong? Is there just not enough? Is there just not enough happening of any consequence on the show, and it's disposable? What's going wrong? Why the viewership's going down?
I think the primary reason, if wrestling fans are watching SmackDown, I think they're like this. I think SmackDown puts them to sleep, and by the time another wrestling show comes on, they don't want to see it. I mean, SmackDown is not, it's not a very exciting show at all. Another thing about Rampage is the time slot they have. 10 o'clock at night is not a good time. Not on a Friday night. 8 o'clock might be okay. But I think the time hurts them more than anything else. But I also think Rampage, they have almost too many guys that they're trying to introduce. unless you see a familiar face on there, I don't think the people are watching AEW enough to get that familiar face yet. Now, they may watch Dynamite. Now, Dynamite's on what channel? TNT?
I don't know if that's moved to TBS
Rampage
now.
is on Rampage is on TNT. I'm sorry. And Dynamite is on...
Is that TBS, the other Turner station?
Yes, that's it. So, and you're talking about TBS, that's where I started, at that little station. I told you that, at little station off Peachtree and in Atlanta.
You've not told me
station,
this.
Huh?
You've not told me this.
I hadn't told you this.
No, you've not told me the TBS.
Well, Ted Turner, he got involved in a wrestling business, just showing and they would do the TV there in the little studio. And I worked for another opposition company, and we would do our show in the morning and they do theirs in the afternoon. And we would actually run into each other sometimes in the parking lot. But Ted Turner came back and he said one time, if not for wrestling, I don't think TBS would have made it. It was Channel 17 then. He said we wouldn't have made it. So he's got a lot of respect for wrestling. And so we used to go in there all the time. And Ted Turner was a great guy. He'd be working at the station. We'd all come in. Hey, guys, how you doing? He'd wave at us. And so I'm in there one day in the control room, and the show was going on. And he walks in, and he's got this lady with him. Beautiful lady. Guess who it was? Sophia Loren.
Oh.
And he was saying, yeah, this is here and this is here. And hi, guys, how you doing? And they talked to the control engineer, but he's telling her all this stuff. And she's touring the station with him. And I look at the guys. I says, was that Sophia Loren? He said, yep. I said, you ought to saw who he had 2 weeks ago or a week ago or something. I said, who? He said he had Jane Fonda. I went, what the hell? But that Ted got around, and he was a really, really smart guy and never high-hatted anybody. And he took that one station, Channel 17 went, and this was the beginning of network days. And he took it to all over the U.S. I guess it went all over the world. But what a genius he was. And I'm glad I knew him.
Was it Georgia Championship Wrestling? Was that the first show on cable to ever get 1 million viewers? This is something from the back of my head.
Georgia Championship Wrestling?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, I've got a feeling it might be something like that.
But that preceded the Ted days.
Yeah.
Georgia Championship Wrestling. That's when the territory days, and even when Ted started, you still had the territory days, but Georgia Championship Wrestling out of Atlanta, Channel 17, that may have drew a million viewers. But back in those days, we didn't worry about ratings. We worried about house show attendance, because if they weren't there, you didn't get paid. And that gave way to the TV people, or people who knew TV or sold commercials, getting in the ear of the promoters and saying, hey, you got a valuable product here. So let's get the most out of it we can. So, and that started that. Of course, I didn't hear about all this stuff. I didn't even know what they were talking about. But I knew that wrestling was a really, really hot commodity. And it was hotter than we thought it was. Like in Memphis, we were the best known athletes or this personality in Memphis, and sometimes didn't even know it. You know, they would be all these people going these places, and we'd show up and people would run over to us. And how can you be so stupid to not know that and we knew a lot of people knew us. We just didn't know the extent of how much we were watched. You know, Memphis would draw a primetime rating on Saturday morning. Puerto Rico used to do it too. A primetime rating at 11 o'clock in the morning. They do a 22 rating a 23 rating with a 70 share. And I don't know if you know anything much about TV ratings, but those are huge, huge numbers. And I don't know what the biggest viewing audience had. I'm going to say in Memphis, which is much, much smaller than Atlanta, they probably had their highest was like 650,000 in an area. I mean, that's about a third the size of Atlanta. That's how strong it was.
Just to finish on, and then I'll shut down this podcast. How many times did you meet Ted Turner? And when was the last time you met him or saw him?
Oh, I hadn't seen him since then. Since when I was just basically starting out. That's where I started. I started in Georgia. But and I haven't seen him, I don't know, 40-something years. I just heard of him. But I've read a lot about him, and good guy.
So you never saw him when you went back to WCW in 1990?
Never saw him.
Never saw him. I will, on that sort of anticlimactic last question, I'm going to shut down the podcast now. So thank you very much, Dutch, for joining us. I'll do the plugs again. Well, if you want to hear the plugs, you can hear them at the beginning of the show. But books, Amazon, Dutch has got 2, I've got 2. You can find them. All of Dutch's social media is in the links in the podcasts and in the YouTube clips and the YouTube videos. You cannot miss them. So if you want to follow Dutch, please do. And all that remains me to do now is thank you, Dutch. We the people. We'll see you next week.
See ya.